In 1932, the famous American director Todd Browning made a feature film, Freaks. Being to some extent a tragicomedy, to some extent a melodrama, the film was heavily censored almost immediately after the end of filming, about 45 minutes, and then it was banned altogether. It was listed on the U.S. National Film Registry more than half a century later, in 1994. And the thing is that Browning was not afraid to shoot a picture on a topic that was banned by that time. The film is about the dying genre of the freak show, about people who had no other way but to make a living by demonstrating their own ugliness. Today, the freak show as such does not exist. Medicine has stepped forward over the past 100 years, and the ethics of human relations has undergone major changes. Disabled people are mostly cured or provided with normal living conditions, and this is right. In the 19th century, the attitude was completely different. For a huge number of people who could lead a full life today, there was only one road to the circus of freaks. But there were also positive aspects to this road. Many freaks earned a lot of money and could provide for themselves better than other healthy people. For example, the legendary camel girl Ella Harper, in the prime of her career 1885 to 1886, received $200 a week at the Harris Circus. Taking into account inflation, today it is equivalent to a salary of $25,000 per month. A lot, isn't it? The demonstration of various deviations of the human body has been popular since time immemorial. From the point of view of psychology, this is a win-win option for doing business. Even today we are drawn to look back at a disabled person passing by, and we cannot explain this impulse from the point of view of logic. But looking back at passers-by is ugly and uncomfortable. And circs of freaks provided a legal opportunity to look at anomalies collected in one place and beautifully decorated. Therefore, almost every circus, since ancient Roman times, was necessarily attended by people with disabilities. They had their own numbers along with strongmen and acrobats. In the 16th century, Europe began to move to a market system of relations. Traveling circuses ceased to be a collection of buffoons who earned mainly by alms. Already in the 17th century, a fixed fee was charged for the entrances to many kiosks, and circuses, stopping at the fair, paid money for rent. The circus business began to become really profitable. If in the 15th century circus performers were mostly beggars, and the circus fit in one trailer, then 2 centuries later the circus business became a business. And within the framework of this business, a strange and unpleasant direction began to actively develop, the freak show. If in the days of Quasimodo, the lot of the disabled were pokes and rotten eggs, then the new time began to bring profit to freaks. It was these 3 centuries, from the 18th to the beginning of the 20th century, that became the golden era of the circus of freaks. Profits were already significant, and public morality allowed any cruel treatment of unusual people. In the 17th century, the first famous freaks appeared, who made a fortune on their appearance. The most famous freaks of that time were the Siamese twins Lazarus and John Baptist Colorado, originally from Genoa. John was not so much a man as an underdeveloped appendage growing from about his brother's chest area. He always kept his eyes closed and his mouth open. He couldn't speak. Nevertheless, he lived, moved, and even took food apparently. The brothers' digestive systems were separate. Lazarus, being a rather mobile and slender man, not counting half of his brother growing out of his front part, traveled all over Europe in the first half of the 16th century, Denmark, Germany, Italy, England, and achieved success everywhere. Moreover, he later got married and had normal children. Russia also did not shy away from all sorts of curiosities. For example, Peter the Great's Kunstkammer has become one of the world's largest collections of alcoholic freaks. This, of course, is not exactly a freak show, but the genre is very close. At the beginning of the 18th century, the genre of freak show separated from the usual circus. Enterprising businessmen picked up various crippled, sick, underdeveloped people on the streets and made something like a zoo out of them. Officially, the first performance. However, modern researchers tend to believe that the woman was completely normal. It's just that Africans of exotic tribes seemed to Europe at that time to be something completely outlandish, and an ordinary African woman perhaps ill with something would quite pass for a freak. But these are just assumptions. Nevertheless, in Europe, the freak show remained a fairly rare sight. Freaks were still chained to ordinary circuses, and freaks were often passed off as normal people, just competently made up. But in the early 1800s, the idea of a freak show penetrated the United States. And a terrible, terrible golden age began. Up until the 1840s, American freak shows were not too different from European ones. These were groups of trailers that traveled around the country, unfolding a farce in every city and demonstrating their ugliness. Unlike Europe, American entrepreneurs approached the issue competently. Freaks received fairly high salaries, signed contracts for performance, and the only place where they had to endure the shame of showing their inferiority was on stage. But art requires sacrifice, and in the 1840s photography began to develop rapidly. The owners of the freak show immediately adopted this. Almost all the advertising for the freak show of that time was provided with numerous photo illustrations. In the 1880s and 1930s, there were several hundred circuses operating in Europe and the USA, specializing in the demonstration of human anomalies. The most famous among them were Harris Nickel Plate Circus, the Congress of Living Freaks show, and, of course, the greatest Barnum and Bailey show on earth. The latter is worth telling separately, because it was Barnum who made his circus the quintessence of all the freak shows in the world. Born in 1810, Phineas Taylor Barnum was a businessman by nature and constantly founded companies, subsequently reselling them or giving them away for debts. He managed to be a newspaper publisher, lottery organizer, and shop owner until he came to the conclusion that people can be deceived in simpler ways. In 1835, he acquired an old Negro slave, Joyce Heth, and began driving her round the cities, claiming that she was 161 years old and that she was Washington's own nanny. When interest in the nurse began to subside, Barnum started a rumor that the old lady was not alive, but mechanical, and on the second wave of popularity he collected twice as much. But then Joyce died, and Barnum found his calling. Since 1841, Barnum began participating in an organized demonstration of freaks, the dwarf Charles Stratton, nicknamed General Tom Thumb, the Siamese twins Chang and Ing Bunker, as well as a number of African and Indian women. Stratton was extremely popular in Europe and the USA. He was sent love letters by representatives of high society. He was invited to society, and even his wedding with the midget Lavinia Warren Barnum was arranged as a grand freak show. Barnum founded his most famous circus in New York in 1871. 10 years later, the name of the circus was added to the name of James Bailey, the co-organizer of the show. A unique story and a unique number were invented for each freak. For example, a boy suffering from increased hair growth hypertrichosis only barked and growled on stage, pretending that he could not speak. Barnum was paid very well. People deliberately mutilated themselves to get to work in his circus. The long-haired Sutherland sisters, who performed in his circus on average 1.8 meters of hair for each of the 7 sisters, made a fortune of $3 million at the end of the 19th century. Barnum set a new trend in business development. He used many methods, then unknown. Spread rumors, viral advertising, invent spam paper, and so on. A psychological effect is named after Barnum, when people trust descriptions of their personality created supposedly individually for them, but in fact being an empty common set of words. For example, newspaper horoscopes. In the golden age of American freak shows 1850 to 1930, there was a clear classification of various deviations. Every self-respecting circus had to have a standard set of freaks plus a few unusual, unique specimens. The latter usually received the largest fees. Circuses outbid them from each other, as they outbid football players today. Oddly enough, many women have the ability to grow a mustache and beard. The abnormal growth of these purely male signs is due to an overabundance of androgenic hormones in the female body. In the 19th century, a bearded woman had to be present in every circus. There were so many such freaks that the audience picked only those who had some additional deformities. For example, a gray beard or lack of hands. The usual black beard. 99% of bearded women are black-haired. No one else was interested in. Most bearded women got married many times and had children. Their peculiarity only gave them piquancy. The most famous bearded woman in history was the Mexican Julia Pastrana, who was taken to Europe as a child in the 1840s and who lived in St. Petersburg in 1858 to 1860. An unusually ugly Indian woman, she, nevertheless, did not know the end of aristocratic admirers. She died from an unsuccessful birth. Famous employees of the circus were Jane Barnelli, Lady Olga, and Annie Jones, and the Frenchwoman Clementine Delit even kept a cafe at the Bearded Woman. As already mentioned, this is the most common type of mandatory freak for every circus of the 19th century. People suffering from hypertrichosis, increased hair growth throughout the body. The most famous wolf boy was Fyodor Evtyshev, who inherited the dog face from his father Adrian. Yevtushev became famous by performing in the American Barnum show at the end of the 19th century. Today, such patients lead a completely normal lifestyle. Hair growth is suppressed hormonally, and over time, hair removal products have improved markedly. Today, genetic diseases associated with the skin are either cured or left alone if they do not cause inconvenience to their carrier. The most common group of freaks with skin problems were people with crocodile or elephant skin suffering from severe forms of ichthyosis. This disease is expressed in the violation of the keratinized upper integument. The skin becomes multicolored, keratinized, really resembling a crocodile. The famous alligator freak of the first half of the 20th century was Susie, a crocodile girl. In the 19th century, Ralph Kruner shone with his crocodile horn pose. The second large group consisted of deformed people with elastic skin, patients with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. In this syndrome, the synthesis of collagen, fibrillar protein, which is the basis of the connective tissue of the body, is disrupted. As a result, the skin becomes hyperelastic, and the joints become supermobile up to the bending of the fingers in the opposite direction. Today, the Briton Gary Turner, nicknamed Elastic, is widely known in the Guinness Book of Records, and in the 19th century, the rubberman James Morris shone on the stage. Unusually thin and monstrously fat people most often performed in joint numbers. But if everything is clear with fat people, most often they were people with severe obesity, then skeleton people were usually carriers of genetic diseases. Skeletons were more often men than women, and the upper limit of their permissible weight with normal height it was 35 kilograms. The diseases that cause abnormal thinness can be different from various types of dystrophies to ordinary anorexia. The most famous couple were husband and wife skeleton Pete Robinson 26 kilograms and Fat Bunny Smith 212 kilograms, who married in 1924 and were the stars of the freak show for 20 years. Like many skeletons, Pete had a classical theater education and, by the way, played the harmonica superbly. The skeletons were often educated people who later made a career in other fields. Their ugliness was easily hidden under clothes. Unlike other freaks who just showed off their bodies, deformed freaks were forced to study and work. Because the audience was primarily interested not in the absence of hands, but in the ability to shave with their feet. The most popular were live torsos. The megastar of the 19th and 20th centuries was Prince Randian, the Snake Man. Deprived of arms and legs from birth, he independently took a cigarette out of a pack and lit it, drew, wrote, moved around, was married twice, and had 6 children. Of the women, Violetta Aloysia Wagner became famous, who knew how to dress herself and even put on makeup. Also famous was the armless photographer Charles Tripp, who demonstrated the ability to shoot with his feet. This is with the help of cameras of the 19th century. And the half-naked Johnny Eck, deprived of the entire lower half of the trunk due to sacral agenesis. Medusa Van Allen, nicknamed Little Miss Sunny, was born in 1908 and suffered from a unique genetic bone disease, as a result of which only her head grew. She could neither stand nor sit and always lay down. In the freak show, she usually played the roles of babies. She, 70 centimeters, was carried around the stage in her arms, cradled, rocked, and then she suddenly began to talk about philosophy and literature, plunging the audience into delight. Medusa was the star of Ripley's circus of human oddities. The most famous freak of this kind was a certain Leonard Trask, born in England in 1805. At the age of 28, Trask fell from a horse and earned a curvature in the spine. After another 7 years, he fell out of the crew and received a number of fractures. For the next 18 years, his spine bent spontaneously. As a result, Trask's nose was buried in his chest. He could no longer see anything in front of him and earned a living by demonstrating ugliness. Researchers claim that the cause of the bend was ankylosing spondylitis, a systemic joint disease, but there is no firm certainty about this. Another strange freak was the German Martin Lorello, who could turn his head 180 and stay in this state for quite a long time. He toured Europe and the USA a lot, performed at Barnum's, was married, and even wrote a satirical pamphlet, How to Turn Your Head 180 Degrees, to detailed instructions. Freaks with phocomelia were in great demand. In this disease, the hands and or feet are attached directly to the trunk without shoulders, forearms, shins. A person really resembles a penguin or a seal. A small number of deformities in penguins were caused by the high infant mortality of those who suffered from congenital phocomelia. In principle, such an anomaly in nature occurs as often as the absence of any limb from birth, but only 3% of patients with phocomelia survive to 5 years. In addition, the subtype can include quite common lobster people patients with ectrodactyly. In this disease, the number and shape of the fingers on the hands, as well as the shape of the feet, are essentially arbitrary. Most often, ectrodactyly have 2 fingers on each hand. They are formed by fused tissues of normal fingers. The hands at the same time resemble clothes. Famous freaks of this type were Fred Wilson, born in 1866, Bobby Jackson, early 1910s, and Grady Stiles, Jr., a unique lobster in the 3rd generation. Up until World War II, the ethics of human relations allowed the freak show to flourish. Todd Browning's famous 1930 film Freaks shows a typical freak show with a standard set of freaks plus a few unusual freaks. True, the ethics of this film shocked the public even in those years. Browning fell out of favor and turned from a famous director into a Hollywood outcast. He continued to shoot, but failure followed failure. The freaks are played by real circus freaks. The Wormman Prince, Randian, who was born without arms and legs and gained fame all over the world thanks to his skills. Johnny X Half-Boy, deprived of the lower half of his body. Siamese twins Daisy and Violet Hilton, fused sides by the way. Today such twins are separated, but even ugliness did not prevent the sisters from marrying and divorcing several times. Martha Morris, the armless miracle, and Frances O'Connor. Oh, how she drinks wine with her feet in the movie. The listed freaks were, at least, full-fledged mentally and played in the film as actors. Problems with the law were caused by the use of mentally retarded freaks, the microcephals Zip and Pip, the bird woman Cuckoo suffering from Seckle syndrome and blindness, and so on. Question wasn't ethics at all, but that most people really didn't know about the existence of freaks. More precisely, they knew, but pretended not to know. And then they showed everyone, look, there is a freak show in the USA. After the Second World War, freak shows lost popularity dramatically. Society has become more rigid in ethical terms. The struggle for various rights, including the rights of the disabled, has become fashionable. And many freaks who earned a lot of money before the war and, in general, were happy after the war languished in poverty and obscurity, including the aforementioned half-wit Johnny Eck. By 1955, the ban on freak shows as a phenomenon had been adopted by all European states and most U.S. states. Freaks could exhibit themselves at will in the form of separate numbers, but posters with the words amazing ugliness, lizard man, or the best freaks we have disappeared once and for all. Nowadays, television programs serve as an analog of the classic traveling circus of freaks. For example, on the British Channel 4, the famous and always under threat of closure weekly program Body Shock, each issue of which is dedicated to some unfortunate person suffering from outlandish mental or physiological abnormalities. At various times, the program talked about feral children who grew up in the jungle, a man weighing 500 kilograms, people with parasitic Siamese brothers and sisters, progeria patients, an 8-legged girl, Siamese twins with a common brain, and so on. A similar program about extraordinary people is broadcast today in the UK on Channel 5. Another analog of the old freak shows is the Circus of Dwarfs. There are very few such circuses in the world. They are closed communities and rarely allow ordinary people into their inner lives. Individual freaks demonstrate themselves in various television shows and club performances. For example, in the USA, the Lobster Boy is widely known by the nickname Black Scorpion. He hides his real name, the man with fused fingers. His hands resemble lobster claws. The difficult question is who is happier, the freaks of the 19th century, who earned decent money with their ugliness, or the modern disabled? If the latter refused all their benefits for the right to restore their health, the former did not even think about it. Their mutilated bodies were their bread, and there was no question of any ethics. But when looking at vintage photos, remember that compared to these people, you have no problems at all. Even if you were fired from your job, your wife left you, and you owed a big mafia boss, you still have no problems.